Hello, Happy New Year! Ako po si Paterno S. Makel at ito ang Newsbreak Chats. Dito sa Newsbreak Chats, dadalhin namin kayo sa likod ng kamera habang tinatalakay natin ang mga pinakamaiinit na issue nitong nakaraang 2 linggo. Ngayong buwena manong handog ng Newsbreak Chats, pag-uusapan natin yung buwena manong biyahe ni Pangulong Ferdinand Marcos Jr. sa China. Kasama natin ngayon ang Malacanang reporter ng Rappler, si Bea Cupin, at ang foreign affairs reporter natin, si Sofia Tomacruz. Welcome back to Newsbreak Chats. Bea, Sofia, dahil napapadalas yung biyahe ng Pangulo, medyo napapadalas din tayo dito. So, nung huli nating episode ng Newsbreak Chats, ang pinag-usapan natin ay yung mga biyahe niya sa
Right after Bangkok and Cambodia yun.
Bangkok and Cambodia.
Or even ASEAN.
Pati yung pagbisita dito ni Vice President Kamala Harris. So ngayon, itong biyahe niya sa China, medyo kakaiba ito sa ibang coverage natin, hindi ba? Dahil ito yung isa sa mga pagkakataon na kinover natin ang biyahe ng Pangulo via virtual means. Kamusta? Pero bago yung kamusta, bakit nga ba tayo virtual yung coverage kay Pangulong Marcos dito sa China?
Siguro isa rin to sa reason that one of the things that makes this trip unique. As we all know yun nga, parang heading into the mismong start of the state visit, there were reports na COVID-19 cases were increasing. And even before that, actually, part ng kasunduan ng China at ng Manila, ng Beijing at ng Manila, ay magkakaroon ng bubble setup. So, yung delegation. So, yung delegation kasi, para lang sa mga hindi familiar, merong delegation na kumbaga yun yung gobyerno, meron ding tinatawag na media delegation. So, yung nagka-cover sa Pangulo. In this case, dahil bubble nga, si media tsaka si Philippine delegation, isang bubble lang sila na pumunta doon, which means they're very minimal yung interaction nila in Beijing. Parang kumbaga limited to the venues where the state visit would actually happen and the hotel where the entire delegation was billeted. And because of that, walang option na magkanya-kanya ng lipad into Beijing. So the only way to join and to cover the presidential trip was to join via the presidential plane, which is limited slots. So hindi tayo nabunot, hindi tayo nasama doon. Maraming part ng MPC na hindi nabunot, so hindi nakapag-cover in person. Pero in case hindi rin kayo familiar with how a press pool works, parang nagtulungan naman at nag-share ng information. So, that's one of the reasons why we weren't there in person.
Kapag sinabi mong presidential plane, yan yung eroplano kung nasaan si Pangulong Marcos, tama?
Yung PR-001. Wala tayong siguro yung ini-envision ng mga tao kung presidential plane, di ba? Yung si Air Force One, nag-dedicated plane. Wala tayong ganun. Kumbaga, nanghihiram or the Philippine government commissions Philippine Airlines plane for the president's visit. So that's the plane that flies out of Manila. The plane stays in whichever country the whole time, and that's the same plane that he rides coming back to Manila. So doon yung buong delegation. Pati na rin hindi buong media delegation, pero parts of the media delegation. Although, clarify ko lang, yung iba, minsan din may parts ng delegation na nauuna, or humahabol, pero ibang usapan na yun sa China. Sa China talaga wala kang choice. Sabay ka sa PR-001. Tapos sabay ka rin mag-pull out unless mag-positive ka. Thankfully, wala nag-positive sa delegation. Kasi kung mangyari yun, may iwan ka sa Beijing for quarantine.
Kung nakasama tayo dun sa delegation, si Sofia ang slated na sumama dun sa China trip na yun. Pero ngayon, syempre, nag-cover kayo virtually. How was the experience covering it virtually, Sofia?
Well, of course, if you would compare it to being there in person, mas maganda pa rin kung nandun tayo, diba? Because you get to see things happening, you get to sense the atmosphere. So I think that's one limitation that we saw covering things virtually. You can only really go by what is seen on TV, and usually that's what the state-run television,
Yeah.
either in China or state network here in the Philippines,
Yeah.
shows you. So, of course, may edit na yan, may shots and everything. Whereas, if you were there in person, you would see the whole thing and you could feel,
Yeah.
iba pa rin when you're in the room yourself, diba?
Yeah. It's the energy that you see from the
Yes.
interactions. And it's not, to add to Sofia lang, sorry. Di ba parang hindi lang si Xi tsaka si Marcos, pero yung mga staff nila parang
Yes.
parang ngarag ba sila or mga
Oo.
ganung malilit na bagay.
Oo. At, for example, yung mga opportunities to see things behind the scenes, like what Bea said, or kahit yung mga preps, kahit yung mismong atmosphere ng city or the place the president is visiting, because it was a state visit after all.
Yeah.
So may mga pomp and ceremony yung mga visits na yun. Although virtually, we were still able to get the information that was there. If there's one limitation lang, siguro mas dali lang konti kasi
Yeah.
of course, real time kung nandun ka.
Yeah.
But I mean, not impossible, but we managed.
Yeah.
Meron ding mga specific questions na gusto ninyong itanong
yeah.
sana, hindi ba? Pero mamaya natin pasukin yung mga tanong na yan pag nailatag na natin yung trip itself. But yun na nga, marami tayong mga nanghinayang na sana na itanong yung ganito. Isundot-sundot na lang natin as a conversation goes along. Ngayon, ang pinakamahalagang tanong talaga dito, bakit ba mahalaga itong China trip ni President Marcos?
Well, siguro I can start, no? As a reporter covering foreign affairs, this first state visit is, I think, one visit where we will really see kung ano ba yung tone ng relations between the Philippines and China under the new Marcos administration. So, the fact na bagong administrasyon, you don't know how they're going to handle this very delicate, this very important relationship that we have with China, because there are many issues that the two countries share and deal with. Some hotter than others, the hottest of the hot button issues being the West Philippine Sea and the South China Sea, of course. And also other issues that are that have increasing urgency, like yung tensions sa Taiwan Strait. And also, we wanted to see how the new administration would balance those disputes with this desire to increase our economic partnership and strengthen our economic partnership with China, which is one of the world's largest economies. No, I think it was also important. This visit was mattered because we're still coming off of Duterte, no?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of comparison still to how Marcos will handle China versus how Duterte handled China, and I think that's one question. Not only we had, but really, I think most countries and most analysts, most experts, most diplomats were watching to see how Marcos would handle China. Also, also with the context of increased competition between the U.S. and China. So Marcos had already gone to the U.S., had interacted with U.S. leaders, and so the stage was set basically for his interaction with President Xi. So at least as a foreign affairs reporter, those were the three reasons why I think the trip was very important.
Yeah. Ako naman, covering President Marcos he's traveled a lot. In his first 6 na mga visits, most of those visits I covered in person, parang ito yung first trip niya na hindi lang subtle yung pag-draw niya ng history. And I think if we can show a picture of a young Bongbong Marcos, si Bonglet, I think he was 17 probably, maybe 16 to 18.
Bonglet ang nickname niya
sa family niya. This is the young Marcos, as in presidential son pa siya nito. 1974, right? He got it wrong sa speech niya, by the way. He said 1976. So 1974, nagkaroon ng official visit ang Philippines to Beijing. Tas yung head ng delegation ay si First Lady Imelda Marcos. I say na first time to na sobrang ini-emphasize niya. Kasi may pockets of references siya na Like when he met with Saudi, meron siyang reference na I joined parang a Philippine delegation to negotiate oil and things like that. Pero ito talaga, parang ito yung one of the first few images that he featured in his vlog because our president is still a vlogger. He does release vlogs regularly. So this is from the official visit that preluded the start of diplomatic ties ng China and the Philippines by President Marcos Sr. So yun, parang ito, medyo, I don't want to say iconic, but it's one of that era, parang striking images of that era, no? Parang a young Imelda in her controversially glamorous way, no? Parang being welcomed by Chairman Mao. So parang, yun nga, it's interesting na the president cherry picks when he references his personal history, right? Like, sige, again, like when he talked to Saudi, parang, I remember in the 70s, I joined the delegation to negotiate oil. And in this case, he really leaned heavily on it, no? Na parang naalala niya daw, na napakaswerte niya. Mayroon pa siyang personal anecdote na yung litrato daw na ito, or yung moment na ito, nung lumabas na siya sa international press, na-crop daw siya. Actually, if you Google Mao, Imelda, yung makita mong litrato ay yung paghalik nila ng kamay ng isa't isa. Mao and Imelda, I'm referring to Mao and Imelda, na-crop siya. Kasi nga naman, bakit mo naman isasama yung anak ng president ng Philippines? But anyway, and he also said this in his own vlog na masama daw yung loob niya na natanggal siya sa litrato na yun. Humingi siya ng litrato mula sa embassy ng China in Manila at pinadalhan siya ng litrato. And then 50 years later, prinesent siya ng litrato na to, like Xi Jinping and his wife presented him this picture. And I think a clip from the vlog and from Malacanang shows Marcos, kinukwento din niya na na-crop daw nga siya. So,
You mean itong photo na ito, nung teenager siya, hiningi niya sa embassy.
humingi siya sa Chinese embassy ng kopya.
50 years later, pangulo siya.
Oo.
Yung pangulo ng China mismo ang nagbigay sa kanya ng photo.
Yeah.
Parang full circle din sa
Yeah.
trip na to.
Medyo may game din ang China dyan.
Oh, yeah. So you're parang, I don't know if this was pre-negotiated or they picked up from each other, right? Na parang, let's highlight the fact na not only was it na Ferdinand Marcos Sr. started official diplomatic ties between China and the Philippines, but it was the former First Lady and Bongbong Marcos himself, with Bongbong Marcos himself, na parang were part of the trip that kumbaga jump-started yung official na relations ng Philippines and China. So, interesting yun. So, ano rin yun parang, di ba, parang drawing on history, both the political history and the personal history of the sitting president of the Philippines.
Correct. Bago yan, may binanggit ka, mahalagang tidbit yon na si President Ferdinand Marcos, the father, was the president when the Philippines and China started diplomatic relations. Ano bang ibig sabihin, Sofia, kapag two countries start diplomatic relations?
I think important din to note kasi yung context of the time, no?
Yeah.
When President Ferdinand Marcos' father established diplomatic ties to China, it was at a time when most of the world had not yet. So the Philippines was one of the first countries to do that. And in doing so, yung implication nun, the political implication of that, of course, was that we recognized the People's Republic of China as legitimate government. And that's when we also adopted our One China policy.
Most of the world had not yet established diplomatic relations with China because
That was coming off of when Chiang Kai-shek had just fled to Taiwan, and there was, of course, tension between the two countries. And so there was that battle for legitimacy between the both of them. And the Philippines is one of the first countries to say, we recognize you as a legitimate, and we are choosing to establish diplomatic ties to signify that.
Yeah.
And in doing so, of course, you say the other one is not.
Yeah.
And I think, it was also important because at that time, no, the Philippines was seen as, is still, until now, an ally of the U.S.
Yeah.
And so I think it was Imelda herself who kind of played up that symbolism.
Yeah.
That when, I want to pull up the the direct quote so I don't get it wrong. She was basically sending the message that when she went there to kind of lay the groundwork for for her husband to come and establish ties 2 years later, she said it was the beginning of the end of the Cold War because the Philippines was American Junior.
Yeah.
So, I mean, kind of ironic in a way how when we fast forward years later, the atmosphere hasn't really
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
changed or is back to that, no?
Yeah.
So that's what it meant, no, to establish diplomatic ties.
Yeah.
Actually, given that context, it is also full circle for China.
Yeah.
Kasi it was A. Marcos that started diplomatic relations between the Philippines and China. And then, down the road, it was an Aquino who filed
Yeah.
a case against China.
Strong, not the tense, one of the more tenser times between our relations.
And now, we're back to
Yeah.
another Marcos.
Yeah.
To think na ang isa pa nilang gripe nun kay late President Aquino, ikaw naman kalahi ka namin.
Yeah.
May Chinese roots ka.
Yeah.
Ikaw pa nang away sa amin. Si President Marcos ba may Chinese roots? Parang
I
wala.
don't, it's, if meron, because there's a chance na like most Filipinos have a touch
Many
of
Filipinos
Chinese roots in them, but it's not quite
Not
expressed.
pronounced.
Yeah.
Not pronounced.
Although,
Because
you know-
if it were pronounced,
Yes.
they would have
Oh yeah.
played it up, hindi ba?
Yeah. China seems like that's one of the tools that they tapped in. Yung and maybe it also explains them emphasizing this personal history of President Ferdinand Marcos Sr. and China and Imelda Marcos, no? Parang kung wala kayong Chinese roots, ito yung Chinese roots nyo kung baga, di ba? Para kayo yung
Yeah.
isa sa mga una nag-extend ng kamay
Yeah.
at tumulong sa pag-legitimize sa amin sa
Yeah.
international scene.
Perhaps we'll talk about this more later, but I mean, just on the point of, that personal connection, I think now under the new Marcos administration and also considering that presidency is also coming off of a fresh mandate, no, from
Yeah.
the recent party congress last year, there is that effort to play up the I guess the personal bonds or the personal ties between Filipinos and Chinese because the two countries, China especially, wants to increase people-to-people exchanges and connections, which is admittedly their weak spot when it comes to managing the relationship.
Yeah.
Correct. And syempre yung added context dyan is, of course, Chinese culture and Filipino culture, both are strong on family ties. And so maybe they're trying to play it up as much as possible. Kasi in my view, this China trip of President Marcos, the issues are the same.
Yeah.
The issues and the solutions are the same.
Yeah.
But what makes it different is friends tayo Friends tayo noon pa, hindi ba? Ito nga may picture tayo dati.
Yeah.
But I think what people might forget sometimes is that if President Marcos is drawing on that personal connection and the legacy of his father, we can't miss out also on how it was also his father
Yeah.
who declared the Calayan Island groups to be part of Philippine territory. He sent more vessels into the West Philippine Sea. And so it would be interesting to see how Marcos, the son now, uses that legacy, if he draws any lessons
Yeah.
from it.
Yeah.
And if he will be able to kind of try to do what his father did and play China off of the U.S. as
Yeah.
well.
Speaking of cherry picking ni President Marcos, he didn't mention that. I mean, you wouldn't expect him to.
Because it's the first visit as well.
He's not gonna say naman sa bilateral meeting na, oh, by the way, part of my father's legacy
Yeah.
was this. So yun din, parang hindi lang, parang, it's not just when or with whom he dives into his family and family history, that's also political history. Pero pinipili niya rin kung ano yung i-emphasize niya. Siyempre sa harap ni Xi Jinping,
Yeah.
hindi naman niya i-bring up yun. Or, I mean, who would? It doesn't make sense. But, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Ngayon, moving forward, your take, what do you think is Marcos's China agenda, and what do you think is China's Marcos agenda?
Never?
yung naisip ko sa departure message niya na parang meron siyang kumbaga panawagan sa ating Chinese na neighbors no, na parang investors, tourists, students. He singled them out also. Parang we invite you to please come back to the Philippines, invest in us again. So parang that's one thing. And obviously Malacanang would work hard to emphasize yung mga economic gains natin from the visit, as you would expect them to. I'll just go through it quickly without the nitty-gritty of it all kasi wala pa naman silang post-visit report. Yung PR or yung release ng palace is to say na to 22.8 billion in US dollars of pledges, investment pledges. Tas si President Marcos himself naman said merong dagdag na 2.1 billion dollars in trade purchase intentions. So, wow, ang laki ng amount, no? Pero focus tayo dun sa pledges, intentions. So, ibig sabihin, wala pa to. Parang, kumbaga, ano lang yan. Parang, sige, ballpark figure. Ito yung kaya natin. Pero yun, parang wala pang... What we need to see is the follow-through of these promises. And on that note, yun nga, parang, I think it's also, yun nga, parang recognizing and obviously emphasizing how important China is to us and how we are important to China. But at the same time, there's also, yun nga, the West Philippine Sea, obviously. And I want to draw back to what he said in Bangkok. Na he didn't mention this in China, but he said this before, na yun nga, parang, the ordinary Filipino views world issues through hunger. Right? So that's one thing that, and added, idagdag mo doon, tumataas yung presyo ng pagkain sa Pilipinas. Siya yung agriculture chief. So he has to balance all that out. Yun nga, parang being a friend to China, inviting China into, like, to return to investing in the Philippines post pandemic shutdown and borders closing down. But also recognizing that, and maybe Sophia can talk about this more, yung perception din ng Filipino towards China as international ally. So yung mga bagay-bagay na yun. Yung pagbabalanse nun siguro.
Merong isang eksena sa China trip ni President Marcos sa tumatak sa'yo, hindi ba?
Yeah.
A specific soundbite.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd like to talk about it, or maybe we can show it first.
Yeah. So this is actually from the bilateral meeting between President Xi and Marcos.
Sa utos nating dalawa.
In the half century that followed, regardless of the changes in and outside the Philippines, you and your family have stayed committed to promoting friendship between our two countries. Such friendship is deeply valued by us. We have high hopes for the future of the Philippines and the China-Philippine relationship.
Very gratified for your remembrances of even my little part that I played in the opening of relations between China and the Philippines.
It's a mutual emphasis on the yun nga, again, history, na political history na 50 long years of diplomatic relations, but also, and your family's role in that relationship. So parang na-realize ko nga, para siyang technically they're strangers, Xi and Marcos. Like, wala naman silang personal relationship talaga na they can draw on. But they want to make each other feel comfortable, perhaps, by emphasizing na, but historically, this is the role that you played and we played. And therefore, there is no reason for us to be aliens to each other, strangers to each other.
Yun nga lang, kailangan ko lang i-point out na hindi dapat nanonormalize yung mga references to a leader and his family in a democratic country.
Yeah.
Kumbaga, it shouldn't matter if he comes from this family or that. But that is the reality that we have.
Yeah.
Hindi ba?
Kasi di ba yung sinabi ni President Xi, it's not na the Philippines lang but specifically the Marcos clan.
The Marcos clan, and they do not own
Yeah.
the Philippines. But of course, China has to maybe play along or
Play nice, play to
Correct.
whatever. And also siguro to emphasize din, hindi lang si President Marcos ang Marcos sa trip na yan. Kasama din, pero nasa dulo siya banda ng table ng Philippine side, si Senator Amy Marcos.
correct.
At isa ring, although hindi siya Marcos Romualdez siya, permanent member of the Philippine delegation whenever the president travels is House Speaker Martin Romualdez, who is a cousin of the president and a nephew of the former First Lady. So,
Correct. So it's really sadly, a family affair.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So, wrapping up, just to ask the two of you, pang ilang biyahe na to ni Pangulong Marcos sa Bea?
Seventh country.
Seventh country.
And seventh trip outside the Philippines. Because again, he visited Singapore twice, although the second time was not an official visit. It was an announced leisure visit.
How would you assess the foreign trips of President Marcos so far? Bea and Sofia, as your parting words.
Yeah. It's a lot. And even he has acknowledged it, and yet he's still going. Again, yun nga, parang what I see now, it's all pledges, like from New York to, if they're not existing investments na kumbaga na-reaffirm lang, most of the things that have been promised to the Philippines are just promises. So, what I see now is kumbaga, the Marcos admin is showing us a model unit of beautiful condominium. High-end, beautiful condominium. Pero yung turnover ng condominium, baka 3 years pa, baka 4 years pa. Minsan madadelay yan ng 5-6 years. So yun, parang they're painting this beautiful picture. But right now, and in fairness, 7 months pa lang naman din, yun nga, we don't see, and you don't expect to see naman right away, right? The advantages of that. But it's a lot of traveling for the first 7 months of a president.
Tsaka ang condominium ba na yan ay may mga cracks,
Oo.
magandang bang pagkagawa,
Oo.
hindi natin alam dyan sa condominium, quote-unquote, na pinapakita ng China.
Sa show unit.
Correct.
Right.
Sofia?
Well, yeah, like Bea, it's a lot of traveling. And while while it's expected, no, that the president would go out into the world again and seek to reestablish ties, especially coming off of both post-Duterte and now that the world is opening up again, it's a pandemic. So there is that need to kind of get pledges and possible economic investments. I think it may be running its course, if I could say that, the frequency of these trips. We know that there are several more planned in the coming year alone, in the coming months. But I think it's becoming more and more of an issue to the public as well, the frequency of these travels and how often, how much it keeps the president away from home and the problems and issues that need solving here at home. No, and I think while sure it's expected for the president to go back out into the world and reestablish those ties and seek those pledges, that cannot be the reason forever. Because you won't run out of places to travel, right? And invitations to accept.
There will always be
there will always be invitations to accept. But then I think here, I think in the coming months we'll be seeing more of, or I hope so. Yeah, we'll be seeing more of that perhaps urgency to settle home and address some of the issues that are happening here.
Davos was a surprise. He initially expressed apprehension na parang, I don't know, like, I don't see the purpose. And then we find out he's going. So,
I think it's also a question to be asked how much of these trips need his presence.
Yeah, correct.
And not only his presence, but the presence of so many other people who come along with him, right? Because there are secretaries who also leave, secretaries who leave, and how much of this can now be done by his alter egos, like the Secretary of Foreign Affairs and
Kala ko via Zoom.
no longer.
Wag naman.
The Secretary of Foreign Affairs or the Secretary of Finance. Especially now that, I mean, yes, it's only been 7 months, but it also has already been 7 months.
Well, marami-rami pa tayo mga biyahe ni President Marcos na i-cover. Salamat, Bea, Sofia, at maraming salamat sa inyo, mga nanonood sa Newsbreak Chats. Ako po si Paterno S. Makel. See you again.